Hunting is a staple in Idaho. Sprawling wilderness and waterways cover much of the state, acting as the perfect backdrop for a western hunt. Although Idaho is among the least populated states in the Union, it sells just under 300,000 hunting licenses each year, ranking it number 5 for licenses sold. Local hunters, being often the most experienced with the landscape, will often be the first to remind you of just how much danger is lurking in those mountains. Each year, Idaho sees multiple backwoods casualties, be it from exposure, wildlife, or the environment itself. But a few times over the years, we've been reminded of the ever-present but often overlooked dangers from the apex predator, man. In the fall of 1974, Mark Carlson's life was looking up. At age 17, he's in the rapid transition from teen to adult and fully embracing the responsibility. He has just gotten his first job as a busboy at the Downtowner in Boise, and with his first couple paychecks and a gracious parental cosign, he's able to get his first car, a blue 1965 Mustang. By every account, Mark was the definition of a good kid. The fifth of 9 children, he never drank or smoked. He preferred staying home with his family over going out, and his free time was often spent bowling or coaching Little League baseball. With his newfound independence and a little bit of disposable income, Mark buys some basic gear and sets up for his first hunting trip, a whitetail hunt in the Huckleberry Flat area. His excitement builds as the season grows closer, and on the morning of October 20th, 1974, Mark heads out bright and early for his first hunting trip out in the woods. Mark's family wakes up after he's already left for the day, but they're aware of Mark's trip and go about their Sunday. As the day comes to a close, Mark still hasn't returned. Once night falls on the area, their worries begin to arise, and they alert the sheriff. Mark's car is quickly found in Huckleberry Flat, but a storm is beginning to roll in, bringing a blanket of snow over the area. Initial searches in the immediate vicinity are fruitless, and it's assumed Mark had put some distance between himself and his car, and it's likely lost or holed up waiting out the storm. The next morning sees a large posse of volunteers and sheriff's deputies descend on the area. There's people on foot, four-wheeler, and even horseback attempting to seek out the lost teen. Witnesses from the previous day come forward and state they'd seen Mark out hunting twice the day before. Searchers comb the dense underbrush looking for any clues, but the fresh snow has made it extremely difficult. The first full day's search comes to a close with no sign of Mark's whereabouts. By Tuesday, tensions at the Carlson household couldn't be higher as they waited with bated breath. A muted TV in the corner is playing local news coverage, while the family sits together awaiting news from the Boise County Sheriff's Department, when the worst headline possible comes across the screen: body recovered in the Huckleberry Flat area. It'd be over an hour before the foregone conclusion would be solidified when Mark's stepfather Clyde would answer the phone call from the Boise County Sheriff, confirming that they had found Mark's body. Death had been the last thing they were expecting, and any hopes of Mark stumbling in the door with fantastic tales of his 2-day misadventure are instantly crushed. As the details become available, they immediately begin to raise eyebrows. Mark was found face down in a creek just 100 yards from his car. He's found under a blanket of snow with a fallen branch over a portion of his body. He's a single gunshot wound to the left side of his stomach, exiting through his back, and he has a large bump on the back of his head with scratches with gravel embedded on his face. His body was very dirty, with mud caked extremely thick in some places, and all of his valuables, watch, wallet, and car keys are still present. However, his new orange hunting vest and his bolt-action Sears 30-30 are nowhere to be found. As the days pass and the snow melts, at least 5 more searches are conducted looking for the missing items, but to no avail. Their location as well as the location of the event would elude the search teams. An autopsy is immediately ordered to determine any details possible about Mark's death, and it finds he was likely shot with his own rifle, severing a main artery to his heart, causing him to bleed out in around 20 minutes. The hematoma on the back of his head, however, raised more questions. Although it was never definitively stated, multiple people who observed the bump believed Mark had been struck with a crowbar. Law enforcement switches from search to investigation as soon as the discovery is made. Mark's family believes he had not been out hunting alone. His parents had told him never to go alone, and when asked by his sister, he had said he was going with someone, but never specified who was accompanying him. A clerk from the local Circle K states she saw Mark with someone in the store that Sunday morning. Witnesses had seen a VW in the area with a young man driving it. The driver was operating the vehicle erratically and seemed to be frantically looking for another hunter in the area. Mark's friends are asked, but no one comes forward as having been up there with him that day. With no forthcoming witnesses and no scene to investigate, a lot of the initial workup was based on speculation. It would be 2 years before his rifle would be found, a full mile and a half from the location of his vehicle and the spot where Mark was found, with the spent shell casing still in the chamber. This discovery would raise even more questions. Some detectives had previously speculated that Mark had possibly accidentally discharged the gun into himself nearby his car, and ultimately fell down the hill next to the road and crawled to the creek before perishing. But the gun being found where it was squashed this theory. Others pondered a possible suicide attempt, but many details cast doubt on that as well. Why would Mark shoot himself in the stomach, and if that was the case, how did he clear the nearly mile and a half between the location of the gun and his final resting place while actively bleeding out? What happened that October day? Was this upstanding kid victim to a poor set of circumstances, an accidental discharge far from help, and a slip/crawl to the creek? Was this a strange self-inflicted wound? Or was there something or someone more at play here? Was this an accident that rather than take responsibility was covered up? Or was it someone's intention to kill Mark Carlson? From the moment that searchers found his body, suspicions of foul play were held. There was a large amount of mud caked to one side of him as if he had been dragged, with one searcher even remarking, "There ain't a damn bit of mud in this county except down at the creek, and that mud was pretty heavy on his leg." The scratches on his head embedded with gravel were another massive indicator that he had not crawled himself, but was instead dragged to his final location. The family continued to wait for some sort of lead, but the lack of evidence and witnesses makes investigation near impossible. Mark's case would ultimately be closed, with no actual closure to be found. As the decades would pass, Mark's death would torment his surviving family members. Wanting to dig a bit deeper and see if there was something maybe missed over the years, they began working on the case on their own in the mid-2010s. By happenstance, the topic arose while one of his sisters is catching up with an old Boise friend in 2014. The friend was taken aback at the details that Mark's sister had and the details that she lacked, and made a startling admission. She had previously heard about the case in the 80s or 90s from her ex-husband RG. RG told her all the details of the case, including that Mark had been shot by his car, and stated, "I'll never forget that car. It was beautiful." The statement aside, this was alarming. ISP had theorized him having shot himself at the car, but the evidence for that isn't clear, nor was that theory public information. RG's retelling of the story seemingly included non-public information, and with that, Mark's sisters notified ISP of their findings, knowing this may be the first lead they'd had in 40 years. Continuing on RG's trail, Mark's siblings were able to find another woman who was also an acquaintance of RG. This woman claimed she had been at a large gathering that included RG and several of his family members. A large group of people were talking when the topic of Mark's hunting incident arose. RG made a comment to his uncle about knowing what had really happened to Mark Carlson. His uncle immediately became enraged, telling him he was never to tell anyone he knew anything because it'd get him in huge trouble. I'd generally encourage anyone to take these statements with some skepticism, as hearsay from scorned lovers can be, at times, less than reliable. However, RG's explanations have been lackluster to say the least. When the Idaho State Police interviewed him in 2014, he claimed a high fever from a toothache years ago had destroyed his memory and he was unable to recall anything about Mark. He was, however, able to describe his time in service, his branch, unit, and other small long past life details. This excuse does anything but quell suspicions. While it is possible that RG was the one to shoot Mark, Mark's family also thinks he may have been one of several people present and not necessarily the one to have pulled the trigger. RG would have been only 14 or 15 at the time of the incident, and his ex-wife described his recollection of that of a traumatized kid and not a cold-blooded killer. Mark's family believes that there were 3 or 4 other people present, and some of them may have worked with Mark at the Downtowner. While attempting to contact people from Mark's life, his siblings cite this as a particularly difficult group of people to get in contact with one sister stating, "I was able to locate one person via email that worked there. I asked him if he worked at the Downtowner in the 70s, and he was quick to reply with yes, he worked there. Then I told him who I was and asked if he might be able to help me, and it went completely silent. He's never responded to my request." In 2014, at the request of the Carlson family, Mark's case, number 1799, was reopened 39 years after it was initially closed. While the investigators are realist about the lack of evidence at hand, they're hopeful that one day they may be able to shed some light on the elusive facts in the case. Idaho State Police Captain Bill Gardner, in a 2014 interview with a local Boise news station, stated their biggest question was why. "That's really the big question. There doesn't seem to be anything that would point to someone having a grievance with this young man. It may take someone that knows information about that to actually show the bravery to step up and contact us." Adding, "Within the last year, we did receive a little bit more information, enough information that we can at least follow up on certain things." Mark's family is understandably exasperated at the time and effort it's taken to get this far, but they too refuse to lose hope. In a 2018 interview, Mark's sister Connie is quoted, "Every day we talk about Mark. We think about him and we just shake our heads that somebody made a big mistake. Out of anybody I know, he's like the last person that deserves something like this. He never picked on anybody. He was just a decent guy, a decent person. He would have been an awesome husband, father, whatever. He was a good brother. I'm hoping this person comes forward. It's just a matter of time. I know it is. Life hasn't been easy on this person, and it'd be better for him to just come out with what happened." Mark would be turning 66 this year, and would likely be looking to welcome great-grandchildren into the world in the near future, a family that ended before it could begin. By every account, Mark was a great friend and brother, a promising young man with nothing but potential. We know how the story of that day begins, and we know how it ends, but after nearly 50 years, the details about that day remain unknown. Mark's life was cut unfairly short, and the closure his family rightfully deserves has been kept from them for half a century, leading them to helplessly ponder who shot Mark Carlson.